Hey folks, here at OS Reviews. You're watching our retro throwback review of the Nokia 6210 Navigator. This was a mid-tier phone released by Nokia in 2008, and it's interesting because it was one of the first navigation-focused smartphones. What's even more interesting and perhaps baffling as we look back here in 2017 is it didn't use a true GPS chipset, but relied on a GPS, which is actually pretty similar to even feature phones. So it does offer some navigation as far as being in your car and maybe by foot. It can tell you directions on the go, but it does require a cellular connectivity or a data plan for it to work, very similar to going online. Regardless, that was the main selling point of the Navigator, the Nokia Navigator, and other specifications were also pretty typical for a mid-tier smartphone released by Nokia almost 10 years ago. And they included a 2.4-inch TFT LCD display with a 240 by 320 pixel resolution. There was a 3.2 megapixel autofocus enabled camera with dual LED flash. That's actually a pretty good camera even here in 2017, despite having only 3 megapixels. There's 128 megabytes of RAM, a 950 milliamp hour capacity user replaceable battery, and there's also Symbian OS 9.3, which was pretty typical for a phone of its caliber, along with a 369 megahertz ARM11 processor that was sufficient for Symbian, which is a pretty optimized operating system, so everything still ran pretty smoothly. Otherwise, that was the extent of most of the features on here. There is Bluetooth, but even back in the day, even smartphones didn't come guaranteed with Wi-Fi, so this one did not come with that functionality, unfortunately, and relied on cellular connectivity if you wanted to get online. The footprint of the phone feels compact and pretty well constructed because the backplate is made out of aluminum and metal accents, even though the frame and the front here are made out of plastic. It's relatively petite for a phone of its size, and there's a slide-out T9 style layout for dialing numbers and a pretty cool backlight which glows blue, and it's accented on various places throughout the phone. Otherwise, if we take a closer look at the design, on the back here there's also a loudspeaker. The side here features access to a 2-stage camera shutter key for accessing the camera, and I actually really like the layout here. It makes sense. It seems more like a dedicated point-and-shoot camera than a regular phone if you're holding it in this mode, and the volume rockers here can also act as zoom controls for zooming in and out of your photos, which is pretty cool. The top features access to a proprietary 2.5mm headphone port, which is unfortunate, but you can use stereo Bluetooth to listen to music instead, and the side features access to a standard micro USB port for charging and syncing information with a computer under this flap. There's also access to a micro SD card slot for expanding the built-in memory. This is a quad-band GSM phone. Sliding the keypad open, I have to say that the design is pretty reminiscent of the iconic Nokia N95 and to some extent the Samsung Innovate. However, the Innovate is a much larger phone with a 2.8-inch screen as opposed to only 2.4 inches. As a result, you can see the top row here is a little bit cramped, and if you're rapidly texting or dialing by feel, sometimes they get squished, your finger gets squished down a little bit, but regardless, the keys themselves are nicely spaced apart and they offer a pretty large surface area for easy texting and dialing. It's pretty tactile and easy to tap on to enter numbers as well as text messages when you're doing that. Here we have access to a 4-way navigation toggle, which is easy and responsive to access to hotkeys for navigating things on screen. There's also dedicated multimedia keys that will take you into the main menu, a clear key, talk and end key that also dubs as a power key, and interestingly enough, there is a dedicated navigation key. Tapping on this opens up Nokia's Navigator free service, which is preloaded with maps in your region, so in our case the United States, and as long as you have, again, a GPS service or cellular connectivity, you're able to instantly navigate around and walk around. It'll tell you your location as you are moving. Let's take a closer look at some of the features of the software. It does run on the standard Symbian OS 9.3, so the menus and the icons and everything are pretty standard if you've used a Nokia phone back in the day. There's access to your status information on the top, including connectivity, battery status, that will be presented in the bar that gets shorter and shorter as you run out of juice. Time and date settings, there's also a row of commonly used apps which you can program, and notifications as they start to come in. So this is pretty similar to how Windows Mobile also displayed your tasks, and it definitely seems aging here in 2017, but it's easy enough to understand. It just looks a little cluttered. I can tap on menu here to go into my full list of applications, and you can see there are a few bloatware apps that are built on here. There's Nokia Maps, which is used for navigation. There's also messaging services, landmarks, which you can set up as well as download. There's also access to the internet, which gives you access to more mobile apps, things like Download Manager, things like Yahoo Go for searching. Interesting that, again, Yahoo seemed to still be quite dominant in the mobile platform here back in the day, before Google kind of took over. And there's also a typical browser here that allows me to load up mobile versions of sites as well as desktop versions, but sometimes they weren't rendered correctly. And again, with a 360 megahertz processor, it is a little bit slow to completely load up more complex sites. There's also access to a gallery, settings, Office that gives me productivity tools, stuff like Quick Office for editing and creating Office, Excel, PowerPoint documents. There is an Adobe PDF reader. I can create quick memos and notes, a calendar, a built-in dictionary for multiple languages, in addition to a zip file manager for quickly compressing my files on an SD card or loading those up, and of course active notes that I have already open. So everything on here is pretty easy to look at. You can see this very small circle icon on the screen. That means that this app is currently open, and that's a quick visual way to know which apps are running in the background, and you can toggle between them in terms of multitasking just by tapping and holding on this bottom key here for a few seconds, and then I can easily go through these by selecting the one that I want. It's actually pretty swift and responsive, and it's a nice little intuitive way to multitask on Symbian. Taking a look at some images I shot with the phone's camera, you can tell that, again, the quality of the images is not shabby at all for a phone almost 10 years old. There's a nice amount of details present, and colors seem to be fairly well saturated and accurate looking. Even under kind of difficult lighting conditions, it still captures your subjects pretty well, and it's an autofocus sensor, which means that you can see that up-close objects are still relatively in focus. The dual LED flash definitely helps under darker environments, and as a whole, it remains pretty impressive as far as the overall image quality. Certainly not bad and good enough to share with friends and family via social media. I can also very quickly edit these. I can also use these in a text message or throw them into an app to share with friends and family directly. Stuff like that that works pretty well. So exiting out of this and looking at the camera interface directly, I can tap and hold on the camera shutter key for a few seconds, and that will bring up the application. The interface here is relatively clean and modern, and focusing is relatively quick as well. I can just tap and hold for a few seconds. The box here will turn green, and afterwards just hold all the way down to capture the shot. It's a little bit slow by 2017 standards, but not bad at all. I can tap and hold again to launch back into the shutter view. Finally, I can zoom in and out of my images again digitally using the volume rocker on the sides. I can also take a look at my options, including things like panoramic modes, white balance, filtering effects, stuff like that, and I can even use the front-facing secondary camera, which offers VGA quality, but it's nonetheless a pretty cool feature to have. Allows you to take selfies. And talking about the display now, we can see that for a traditional LCD panel, it actually offers surprisingly good viewing angles. You can see it's pretty good in terms of visibility even as I tilt the screen up and down, and colors remain accurate looking. Now, it's not the brightest panel in the world, so under bright light or outdoor conditions, it does get washed out and slightly harder to read, but all in all, it's really not bad. Something else I like about the design is how the plastic they use on the front here kind of gently tapers off at the edges, almost like a bubble. This is similar in design philosophy to curved screens that we see in 2017. Obviously, these are just bezels, and the screen itself doesn't extend to fill the entire size, but from a design perspective, having these really gentle curves does make the phone, from a design perspective, still kind of hold up today, which is quite amazing to look at. If we take a look at the navigation features just by tapping on the bottom key there, Maps Navigator will load up. We'll accept this and hide this in the future. And again, we don't have internet connectivity at the moment, but if I did, it would tell you the signal strength, and you can even use this for, foot navigation. You can walk around or bike around, and it will tell you, where you are and what path you're going on. So it's pretty easy to search up various locations. I can also add it to my saved places, set up a route, as well as send this information to other Nokia devices without too many hassles. So overall, a pretty easy interface to use, and all in all, really not a bad navigation app that's built right on in. I only wish there was a real GPS chipset, which would have been nice, since now it really relies on data connectivity to access these features, which again could be costly depending on the plan that you're going for. And that's pretty much it as far as the core functions are concerned. In terms of playing back music, it offers a decent multimedia experience, very similar to other Symbian phones. It does support cover art. You can sort your music by genres, by artist names, and of course, if you have music stored on an SD card, you can use this as a MP3 player without too many problems, although the use of a proprietary headphone port wasn't the most convenient thing in the world. Sound Clips allows me to use this as a digital voice recorder. The microphone on here is actually pretty clean sounding, and it's also noise reducing. So if I'm in outdoor environments, it does tend to cancel out the background noises that I don't want to hear. And that's pretty good, again, if you are in a crowded place or if you're near an airport and placing a phone call as well. So though this was geared more for navigation and kind of as a multimedia-centric smartphone by Nokia, it could still be used for some productivity tools here and there. Although again, with the T9 keypad, you're a bit more restricted as far as what you hunt and peck out, as opposed to really quickly text with a full QWERTY layout. And that's essentially it. Other core features on here are very simple. You can see the interface here is pretty much optimized to work on this phone. The color scheme matches up, so aesthetically it does still look quite pleasing. And you can see that the dictionary function also works by directly searching up a word, and it'll give you the meanings, synonyms, stuff like that. So basic utility tools are as expected. When it comes to battery life, the Nokia Navigator will last you for about 2.5 days of continuous use before it runs out of juice. Some standby time, sporadic use in between. So that's decent battery life. It's not quite as long as a true feature phone, just because it does still have a 360 megahertz processor. It does still have a few connectivity tools on board that will drain the battery life. With that being said, it definitely is better than Android phones today that are super power hungry and will hardly last a day, just because the screen is smaller and it's still a bit more energy saving. So overall, decent as far as battery performance. And as far as phone call quality here in Seattle, Washington, again, I consistently got roughly 3 bars of reception when I tried testing it with T-Mobile and AT&T, and phone calls in general sounded relatively clean and crisp, so no real complaints there. So anyways, guys, that was a look back or a throwback review of the Nokia 6210 Navigator, which was a navigation-centric smartphone. It's interesting how almost 10 years later, we no longer have smartphones just for navigation or just for the camera. All these features are now expected to be part of the entire cohesive package that consumers purchase. And so the demand and expectations for producing top-end hardware has only gotten steeper and steeper. But it was interesting to look back at, back in the day where just one killer feature alone was enough to convince certain consumers to pick up a device, and the Nokia Navigator was a prime example of that. Other phones that competed in the similar arena a few years down the road would include the Garmin Nui phone and other GPS phones that were quite prominent for folks that wanted turn-by-turn directions without having to pay a monthly subscription fee. So anyways, guys, that's been our retro look back. You can check out more details soon in our throwback article, but for now, this has been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. This has been the Nokia 6210 Navigator.